What's going on, guys? It's Nick here, back with another fantasy football video. Super pumped to make this one, the RB0 strategy. Really think you guys are going to like it. So please, if you have not done so already, please hit that like button. Let's aim for 200 likes. We are definitely capable of hitting 200 likes. I know some of the videos only get like 50 or 60 likes, but I think on this one, I think we can hit 200. So let's aim for that as a goal. The RB0 strategy. And the basic idea that I'm going to put forth in this video is, what is it? Because I guess some of you might not know. I'm sure almost all of you have either used it or have heard about it. But some of you might not know, so we're going to go over what it is, why it's a thing, and then is it dead? Is the RB0 strategy done? Now, I mean, I'm going to answer that one right now and say that no, it is not dead because it's a strategy. And a strategy cannot be dead. What is dead is the idea of people only using that. People looking at the RB0 strategy as a law, as a way of doing things, and that's not what you can do. I'm going to go over why that's wrong. Obviously, we know that's wrong, but I'm going to go why that failed people later in this video. But let's just talk about why it's around. So it started, I guess it started maybe 4, 5, 6 years ago, but it started being a thing in 2014. So not last year and not the year before, but the year prior. It started kind of being a thing that people talked about, wrote about. I made a video 2 years ago, and then last year I made videos on it, and it didn't take off until last year. You know, last year it was, everyone was going RB0. That was like the big thing that people were doing, and it was an overreaction. Again, I'm gonna get to that, why it was an overreaction, but that's why it really became a thing last year, which is probably the first time you heard of it. If you may have heard of it before that, it was in the 2014 season. But why is it around? Now, running backs, I guess in a number of ways they're different than wide receivers. And it's kind of confusing. I'm going to try and go slow when I talk about this. It's a little bit confusing in that their projections are completely opposite when you're talking short-term and long-term. Now, long-term, we're looking this year and I guess into the future, but I guess for season long, we're just talking this year. The wide receiver position is much easier to project than the running back position. From a season-long standpoint, it is infinitely easier to be correct in projecting a wide receiver's production than a running back. The opposite is true during the year. If we were to implant ourselves into week 7 and we said, okay, let's project out Julio Jones' production this week, it's difficult. And you might think that it's not, but it is. It's extremely difficult. That's why, if you play DFS, you know you build your lineup around the running back in a cash game. Every single week last year, I played David Johnson, except week 17. I played David Johnson and Le'Veon Bell in my cash game lineup every single week. Because it's so easy to project the high running backs. And even the low-end running backs. It's easy to know a running back's role each and every week. But what we don't know in draft season is what their role is going to be during the season. We cannot sit here and say, a 4th-round running back, we know what his role is going to be come week 8. But we can be pretty sure, unless they get injured, a 4th-round wide receiver, we can be pretty sure what their production is going to be on average in week 8, because we can project their role in the offense. Now, that might not make sense. Go over and listen to it again. The basic point for RB0 is that I can be pretty confident in these early round wide receivers, what their production is going to be through the season. I cannot do that for running backs. There's a high bust rate, and again, there's a high injury rate. And that's what this chart shows. This first chart is Pro Football Logic, and then the one after this is from the Washington Post, but it just shows running backs get injured more, and this is something we all know. They're injured for a higher percentage of games. Their injury length is typically longer, and this all makes sense. I mean, we've seen running backs go down. It's typically knee injuries. Running backs get knee injuries more than wide receivers get knee injuries, but they go down on a higher percentage of plays, and for honestly, their injuries are generally more long-term. So when you have a high bust rate, difficulty in projecting season long, when you have high injury rate, it makes sense that wide receivers are safer picks early on. You look at this chart. Of the first 10 drafted, the number that finished in the top 10 per position for wide receivers and running backs over the last 10 years. And as I'll get to in a second, 2016 is the one outlier, but it's easier to project wide receivers. we have another chart. And this one you guys have seen a ton on this channel. This one, it's pretty easy to follow. Some people have said it's not easy to follow, but blue is wide receiver, gray is running back. And they follow the exact same chart. This is from 2012 to 2016, cumulative average by round of percent of success rate. So I set a startable option, which was a top 31. So in a 12-team league, a startable option. And we know that in the first 4 rounds, it's super important to hit on these positions. But that wide receivers typically, until you hit round 9, have a higher success rate. It's only by a few percentage points, but if we're doing an expected value approach, a few percentage points counts. Now, you're asking, well, why aren't you putting quarterbacks and tight ends in this? Well, because as I've said countless times on this channel, it's much more valuable to your team to hit on a running back or a wide receiver early in drafts. This chart and the one after show that in PPR, and it's the exact same thing in standard, except it's more important for running backs in standard. It's a higher difference. It's much more valuable no matter which one you hit on, 1st through 5, running backs or quarterbacks. It's more important to hit on a skill position player than to hit on a quarterback. If you hit on David Johnson, it's infinitely more valuable than hitting on Aaron Rodgers for your team. Now, why did people overreact? And this is what we want to get to in this video. Look at 2015. You can't really see the dates that well, but 2015 is the one where everything's on the bottom. It was in every single year leading up to that, and the data continues for years prior. I only started this in 2012. Every single year except for 2015 was more valuable to have a running back that finished top 5 than a wide receiver. This has a lot of data backing it up in PPR, and in standard it's even more. Like you've heard me say it before, if you're in a standard league, you bump up production for running backs. You really want high volume for running backs in standard leagues, and these bars are just stretched out a little bit more. In PPR, it's closer, but it's still more important to hit on a running back. But what happened in 2015? Well, all of the top-end running backs busted. And that meant that the top 5 for the running backs really weren't that important to have, because you could have had a lower-end guy that put up similar production. So people saw this, and they overreacted. They say, well, everyone that picked wide receivers last year, they did well. And then 2016 happened. And the common belief is that if you went RB0 last year, you didn't make playoffs or you did terrible. That's not true. I'll show you guys in a few slides that that's completely false. I did well. I drafted RB0 in almost every single league, and I still made playoffs in 6 of 7. But what did happen? Now, the league-wide passing rate was the highest it's ever been last season, 59%. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to the 1. And I wrote an article on this. I believe I've already uploaded a video on it. It doesn't mean, just because a quarterback passes for more yards, doesn't mean they're hyper-focusing on the 1. What's really happened is the slot position. That has been the #1 reason quarterbacks are throwing more, because there's more 3-wide sets, and slot receivers are becoming more involved in the offense. So it's not that production's going to the 1s and the 2s, it's that the slots are becoming more relevant, pass-catching backs are becoming more relevant, and yes, 1s and 2s are getting more production. You look at 6 of the last 7, or since 2001, 6 of the 7 highest years in passing percentage have happened. So you look at league-wide passings going up, but what happened last year? It was a dud, and it could be touchdown flukiness. You guys have heard me say countless times that touchdowns are fluky, but the most plays ever were run from inside the 5-yard line last year, and that led to the 5th most rushing touchdowns ever. 2015, we had the lowest since 2009, or 1999, sorry. Lowest since 1999 for rushing touchdowns in 2015. Last year was an outlier for the wide receiver position, and 2015 was an outlier for the running back position. This is backed up by every single point of data that I've done throughout this offseason. You look at this chart. This is the total points from the top 20 wide receivers by year. We see a massive tank in 2016 for the top 20. But then what happened to the next 20? This is what's happening. It's going up and up and up. And this is what people who don't believe in the RB0 strategy point out. They say, I don't need to hit on Antonio Brown because I can grab Jamison Crowder, a guy that I'm actually going to talk about a little bit in this video. I can grab Jamison Crowder, I can grab Willie Snead later, and they can put up fine enough production to where it's not that big of a drop-off from the top-end guys, but what is a big drop-off is the top-end running backs. And I completely agree with that. I'm not sitting here telling you you need to go RB0 because, again, it's a strategy, and a strategy can't die. But when everyone in your league is going running back, running back, running back, they're snagging all of the running backs early and value opens up, this is a viable strategy. Yet another chart. This is just showing 2016 was an outlier. You look at wide receiver 2s, so that would be for 12-team leagues, 13 through 24. The touchdowns that they produced were a huge outlier. All of these numbers are 74 to 96, and then all of a sudden you get 59 last year. It just happened to where there were so many wide receivers that put up nearly identical seasons that everyone who picked David Johnson and Le'Veon Bell and then picked a couple mid-round wide receivers that paid off, those are the guys who won the league. And, I mean, what's going to happen this year? You look at what happened in recent history. People overreacted when all the running backs busted and they started grabbing all the wide receivers. Well, the same thing's going to happen. People are going to overreact. They're going to start grabbing all the running backs, and the wide receivers that should not be going in the second and third round are going to be. Now, I say this, and then I show you a chart like this, which is a little bit difficult to see. But this is research I did of top 10 is the blue, 11 through 20 is the red one, 21 through 30 is gray, and then 31 through 40 is yellow. And it basically shows since 2000, the production per year has a negative slope for the top 20 and a positive slope for 21 through 40. The production is getting closer and closer for the top end and further for the low end. But that doesn't mean you need to grab a top end running back over a top end wide receiver. Because remember, the underlying mentality behind this strategy is that there will be busts. Historically, it's 50%. In the first 2 rounds, 50% of the running backs are going to bust, and it's lower for wide receivers. Less wide receivers bust. You may not believe me after last season, but I guarantee you, historically, running backs bust at a much higher percentage than wide receivers. And we even look at last year, the dream season for drafting a running back early. Todd Gurley, Lamar Miller, Adrian Peterson, Jamal Charles, and Eddie Lacy were all taken in the first 2 rounds. They busted, all of them. That's 5 out of 10. So even on the dream season for running backs, there was still a 50% bust rate for running backs. The only reason people are overacting is because they see how good Bell, DJ, Zeke did, and they wanted them on their team. Now, what are we going to do from this point on? Well, let's look back, because you remember I made the video last season about the RB0 strategy, and I think it's at like 18,000 views. And the overwhelming majority of people said, no, I understand what you're saying, but this value-based team looks far superior to the RB0 team. And you might not believe that because looking at this team, it's not very good. But that's what I'm trying to get at, is that during the drafting season, you guys think your teams are really good. But what you're not doing all the time is building your bench. And why I don't like drafting like this value team is because, well, they took Palmer in the 7th round and he busted. Delaney Walker was taken the 6th and he did fine. But what happens when your early round draft picks bust? Now, Keenan Allen was on both teams, and this was perfect, really. Because my main point when I was discussing in this video was that, okay, one of these early picks could bust, but the RB0 team will be fine. Because it has enough backups and a solid enough bench to make up for this bust. It doesn't need to hit on a tight end. It doesn't need to hit on a quarterback because it's going to stream those. And that's a strategy I'm going to talk about as I go over the team that I drafted for this season. Because streaming quarterback typically, and when I show you the results from RB0, it was quarterback 6. And that's basically what you're going to be at. Every single year, if you stream quarterback, you can typically get quarterback 6 production off free agency if you do it right. And that's what I did last year. It was quarterback 6, and that's even with the Colin Kaepernick 2-point performance. It was quarterback 6. So if you're streaming quarterback, you're streaming defense and kicker aren't on here. I completely threw that out when I was doing this study because I just assumed that both teams would get the same kicker and defense. And that didn't play anything in. I didn't want one team to pick some like great kicker or something and throw the whole thing off. But the idea was that even if an early round draft pick busts, this team will be fine. Because it has so much depth. And what happened? An early round draft pick busted. Keenan Allen busted on both teams. But what happened? There were still 3 stud wide receivers left. And this is what so many of you are afraid. You're like, I can't draft 3 or 4 wide receivers in the first 4 rounds because I won't be able to start one of them. Well, guess what? You're probably not going to pick 4 studs. Okay? Let's think about it from this perspective. There's going to be 3 bye weeks in there. Likely someone's going to get hurt. So your 4th wide receiver is probably going to play more than half of your games on your team. There's going to be 3 bye weeks. There's going to be a few weeks, probably for each one, maybe 1 to 2 weeks each, where they have an ankle injury or they're just in a really tough matchup you don't want to play them against. It's terrible weather and you don't think the wide receiver is going to do anything. That's what that 4th guy is for. But it's also for this. It's also for if Keenan Allen gets hurt. Or A.J. Green in this instance. A.J. Green went down at the end of the year. And what we can't do is look at the rest of the team and go, oh, look at that. You drafted so many wide receivers and they busted. Well, the waiver wire is a thing. I'm allowed to use the waiver wire when injuries happen. So that's what I did. I played this out like each one of these teams were going head-to-head every single week. So I wrote the rosters down, actually put it in Excel, which is what you see here. And every single week, I played them against each other. I set the lineups before the week started. And each week, I allowed 1 waiver wire move. I said a low-owned player, I think it was around like 30%. It had to be under 30% in like standard leagues. But it was only 1. So if you were streaming quarterback, you could stream your quarterback for that week, which is why I only ended up with about 3 or 4 quarterbacks. Because I didn't want to use that. Some weeks when I really wanted to add a player, I couldn't stream quarterback. So I said you can stream a quarterback, you can change 1 player due to injury, but you get 1 move per week for a low-owned player off free agency. And if both teams needed a hole at running back, I would add the exact same player, so there wasn't any like collusion going on. So what happens? These are the teams that it looks like. The green players are who I drafted. They're people who I drafted on the team that stayed there, that were not dropped. Now, you look at Colin Kaepernick and Simeon and you shake your head and say, well, this is stupid. But I played hot streaks. I got rid of Kirk Cousins and I picked up Mariota during his hot streak. And then Kaepernick honestly ended with like some pretty good weeks. I don't remember exactly what they were. I can look it up here right quick. Give me 2 seconds. Last 2 weeks, I played Simeon in week 14 for 17 points. Cap got 17 points in week 5 and then 25 points in the championship. So if you want to download the Excel file, I'm posting it on the website on the rankings page because that's the only page I have. So if you want to go there, link in the description, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. Same page where you download the rankings for free. It's you can download this spreadsheet and see exactly how the teams were throughout the week. It was 11-5 for the running back 0 team over the value-based team, and this is how the teams ended up. Because as you see, I hit on running backs in the middle rounds for the RB0 team. And that's what you need to do to use the RB0 strategy. Just imagine if last season, RB0, maybe it hits, but maybe the top end wide receivers do hit. Allen Robinson has a good year. A.J. Green doesn't get hurt. Amari Cooper goes off. Just imagine this RB0 team with DeMarco Murray, Melvin Gordon, Tevin Coleman, Jordan Howard, but also A.J. Green, Allen Robinson, Amari Cooper. You don't end your team at the draft. You're allowed to make additions. Now, the value team did just fine. I mean, McCoy, Howard, Hopkins. I actually drafted Michael Thomas in that league. Tyreek Hill, Lamar Miller. You might think that it's a better team, but it sort of came together towards the end of the year, and it was still. If you look at it, even in standard scoring, this was compared through standard scoring, this RB0 team that everyone wrote off as a terrible team, as nowhere near the same level as the value-based team, the RB0 team went 11-5. And it was about 11 points difference per week. There were some monster weeks where it was like a 50-point difference. I believe in week 4 it was 65 to 115, but it was 95.7 points per week for the RB0 team, and it was 84.4 per week for the value-based team, and that's not counting defense and kicker. So I guess if you want to add like 15 to 20 points per week, that's what it would have been. I mean, that RB0 team was easily a playoff, maybe a championship contender because 96 points a week with no defense and no kicker, that's a lot of points. So what I'm trying to get at in this video is that when you see a team before the season starts, you've got to imagine what it's going to look like in week 7 if 2 of your top 4 picks go down. Do you have the depth to make up for that? And that's what RB0 does. It provides your team with ample depth at the wide receiver position and then relies on you to make one move. You need to hit on one running back, either in the middle or late rounds that goes off or off free agency, but one. Because all you need to do in most leagues is start 2. So if you can hit on a stud running back late or pick one up like a Jordan Howard or a Jay Ajayi on free agency, your wide receiver is going to be monstrous. As you see, I also drafted a tight end in this one that I'm going to show you in a second. You can stream quarterback, so your team's going to be perfectly fine if you can hit on one running back. So, what do the teams look like for this season's RB0 team? I'm going to do the exact same thing as I did last season. I'm going to follow the teams throughout the year. I'm going to see how they produce. I'm going to add one person off free agency, probably about 30% and under for ownership percentage. But if I'm going to stream, I can only be streaming quarterback, and then I can't add someone for that week. But these are what the teams look like. I have on the left where they were drafted, so rounds 1 through 13, because again, we're not doing defense kicker for this. And it's a 12-team PPR league, 10th overall spot, because I really thought 10th overall, that was a spot where typically you can go RB0 if you want, but you can grab running backs if you want. So I'm not going to go over exactly which rounds people were taken in. You can see that on the left, and I kind of color-coded it by position. What I am going to go through is the lineup, and then I'm going to talk about 2 things real quick. Actually, I'm going to talk about those first. So regardless of strategy, I want to stress the point that if you're in the 5th and 6th round, it doesn't entirely matter at that point if you've taken running backs or wide receivers. If you've taken some stud wide receivers, you're probably going to end up going RB0 because I don't really like a lot of the running backs at that point. But if you took running backs, it's a great spot to lock up some safer options of wide receiver. So I truly believe that in the 5th and 6th round this year, you need to be targeting Jamison Crowder and Willie Snead. Now, they won't be there every single time, but in the majority of leagues, 5th and 6th round, you can get Crowder and Snead. And I really think that my analysis is always geared towards PPR leagues because that's what the majority, the overwhelming majority of you play. I know some of you play standard, which they do drop a little bit in standard scoring leagues, but they'll also be going later, so maybe you can get them in the 6th and 7th round. But in PPR leagues, I really believe the key to winning this year is to hit on one of your first 2 rounds, hit on a running back, hit on a wide receiver, and if you can grab Crowder and Snead in the 5th and 6th round after hitting on a running back and a wide receiver early, stream quarterback, stream defense, get Rudolph in the later rounds, and all you have to do is not be stupid, and you're going to make the playoffs. Because I believe that those guys are going to kill it this year, and they're going at a great value. But aside from that point, I got those 2 guys for my bench in this RB0 team. You've got AJ Green, who's a stud, obviously. Michael Thomas, I think, is going to be a stud this year. Golden Tate, I think, is a PPR monster this year. Jamison Crowder, Willie Snead, Tyrell Williams. I love all those guys. Was it ideal to grab Michael Thomas and Willie Snead? No, it's not. But again, Snead's my 5. And if Thomas goes down, obviously Snead's going to get more heavily targeted. I don't handcuff wide receivers. But I honestly think you can start Michael Thomas and Willie Snead. There's more risk week to week, but they're both going to be startable options, so you can start them on the same team. It doesn't matter. But look at the depth that this wide receiver 0 or this running back 0 team has. AJ Green, Michael Thomas, Golden Tate, Willie Snead, Jamison Crowder, Tyrell Williams. If you're telling me that every single week I can't find 3 studs to start, you're crazy. Now, the running backs are a little weak. I think Paul Perkins is good, but Paul Perkins is nowhere near safe. Kareem Hunt, I think, is a great pick, but he's nowhere near safe. I picked Procise, Marlon Mack, Kamara, who I think are all great options in PPR leagues. So I think that maybe one of them can hit, and maybe I can find a running back on free agency. But there is risk involved there. And this is not like the dream scenario. You know, there are scenarios where you can get stud running backs in those middle rounds. They didn't happen to fall for me. I did these drafts on, I want to say it's Fantasy Football Calculator, and I just put them into Excel so you guys could see them back to back and everything. But you don't need to go RB0 is a big thing that I want to point out, but you don't have to go value based. What you need to do is go into the draft with a completely blank slate. Say, okay, and I've said this before, watch the early round draft strategy video, but go into the first 4 rounds saying, I want to get the best value possible. Then think about strategies. If in the first round, AJ Green is the best available player, you take him. If in the second round, Michael Thomas is the best available player, then you take him. But then what you don't do in the third round is look at the running backs and look at your roster and say, well, I don't have a running back. But then get there and say, I hate all the running backs, but maybe I love Golden Tate. He's not going to go in the third round. I don't know a third round pick. Maybe you love Allen Robinson and you hate all the running backs. Do not sit there and take a running back that you don't want, because you can use the RB0 strategy. You can say, all right, I wasn't planning on this, but maybe it's Travis Kelce, actually, because this draft used him. Because you can grab tight ends and quarterback early in RB0. It allows you to do that. You could have taken maybe Aaron Rodgers instead of the Kelce pick, and then taken Rudolph in like the 8th round instead of, I don't know who the 8th round pick was here. 8th round pick was Kareem Hunt. So instead of Kareem Hunt, you take Rudolph. Something like that. But the RB0 strategy is just that. It's a strategy. So if in the first 2 rounds you got the best value, and then in the 3rd round you hate all the running backs, well, take Kelce. And in the 4th round you still hate all the running backs, well, you know what? Take Golden Tate. And don't be afraid that you're missing out on running backs, because you can hit on Jordan Howard, and then you can have an RB2 of Procise or Perkins or Kareem Hunt, Marlon Mack, Alvin Kamara. I can personally guarantee you that 1 or probably 2 of them are going to be perfectly fine options as an RB2. So your job is to either trade for or trade for or pick up an RB1. Now, it is difficult to trade for RB1s, but I can also tell you this. I really like the wide receivers on this team. There is a world where you can package CJ Procise and Tyrell Williams for an RB1 come week 5. I really think both those guys are going to be great options in PPR leagues. Maybe you have to give up Crowder. Maybe you have to give up Jamison Crowder and Procise, or Jamison Crowder and Mack, or Jamison Crowder and Kareem Hunt. Whatever you have to do. Package 2 players for 1 always in a trade. If it's 3 for 1, even better. But 2 players for 1, you always want to be the person getting the 1. If you can package one of your bench wide receivers that's performing great, plus one of your PPR running backs that's putting up enough points, and maybe he's the backup to someone, you give him a handcuff. For an RB1, this team explodes. Because I think Travis Kelce is going to have a great year. I think if you're starting AJ Green, Michael Thomas, and one of Golden Tate, Crowder, Snead, Tyrell, I think you're going to do great for the wide receiver and flex positions. I think Tyrod Taylor is super undervalued. So then all you have to do is figure out running back. And since it's so hard to predict, since there's a world where this value-based team, where Freeman gets hurt and Corwell underperforms, well, now they're kind of screwed. Because now they're starting Ty Montgomery and Marlon Mack, and now you have better running backs than them. Their wide receivers are great. Like, I built this team as a team that I would draft. I mean, I love Wilson. I love Freeman. I love Crowell. Michael Thomas, Crowder, Rudolph, Garcon. I love that team. With Tyrell, with upside, with Kevin White and J.J. Nelson. Ty Montgomery, Duke Johnson. I love this team, and it's a team that I would draft. That's why I put it on here. But what I want to show you is that there are worlds where this team is not deep enough. Because you took a quarterback a little bit early. Because you took 2 running backs early, and the running backs have a high bust rate. So if Wilson has a year like last year, and the running backs get hurt, you might not have enough depth. And that is the big thing I want to talk about with the RB0 strategy, is that it gives you depth and security at a position that's easy to project, so you can win that position every single week. Stream the rest, just figure out running back. That is the underlying mentality of RB0, is that I'm going to take the guys I know are going to produce early. I'm going to take them away from other teams. I'm going to package them in deals with some running backs that are doing okay, get a stud, and just figure out running back. during the year when I know what running backs are doing. Because we, at this point, just don't know how running backs are going to be used. But come week 5, we have a better understanding of how it works, and we still don't even know. I mean, come week 5, did we even know Jordan Howard was going to be that good? Each week we do, but right now we cannot project the running back position. That's the reason people go RB0. It is not dead, but it's not something you live by, because last year is what happens when you live by it. Last year killed a lot of people who went RB0 because they weren't thinking. They were just grabbing wide receivers early. They didn't care if it was a good value. They didn't care if running backs were slipping. They just grabbed all the wide receivers, and then they tanked. So think for yourself. Pick the players you like early on, and if it ends up going RB0, do it. If it ends up that you've taken a running back, a quarterback, a tight end, like it ends up you've taken all those guys, just draft value. Because if you're getting value at every pick, you know what? You're probably going to be doing just fine. But don't be afraid to do RB0, and don't be afraid to do wide receiver 0, which is a strategy I'm going to be talking about maybe not next week, but maybe next week. We will see. Thursday videos are our strategy videos. It might be the next week video, but it also might be in like 2 or 3 weeks because I want to try and make that predicting a bust video. I've also got to make the late round draft strategy video. Those all come out on Thursdays. That, my friends, is the end of this video. It was a bit of a long one, but it's a strategy that has been a staple of this channel, and I want you guys to know it's not dead. Even if some people tell you it's dead, it is not dead. Just don't use it every single time. Only use it when the value presents itself. So that's the end of this video. Hope you enjoy. If you did, hit that like button. If you're new here, subscribe to the channel, and we'll catch you in the next one.